All right, and hi, and we are meeting for the Great Lakes Basin mapping work group. And I think we can start out with, since Brad is new here, if we could just go, when we're doing our round of check-ins, we can just state where we're from, as well as give an introduction to yourself and do your check-in, how you're showing up today. My name's Anna. I am from Buffalo, New York. I live in the Lake Erie, Niagara River watershed in the Great Lakes Basin. And today it is, well, we've been having a lot of meetings in the design school today. We actually had a really good governance fund meeting. That was our previous call that I was just on, and so we're starting to develop some governance around how we can allocate funding and resources within the design school. So that was very exciting, moving forward on that. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing some feedback on how the mapping project has been going, especially because so many of you have been joining some of our recent workshops that we've been hosting around community mapping. And I can pass it along to Brad.
Yeah, and I'm Brad Sander. I'm in the Grand Junction bioregion, where the Grand and Gunnison rivers come together. So I've been here about 1.5 years, and I'm just coming with a really kind of light, interested energy. Don't have a GIS background. Was really blown away by the Bennett posted the mapping, and it just made me see an area that I had known for so long, just held it together in a much more interesting way. So really interested to learn what you guys are doing. And Peter?
Everybody, Peter Whitehouse in the northeastern Northern Lake Erie bioregion, located physically in the political community of Shaker Heights, Ohio. So I'm at the Case Western Reserve University and have a little bit of contact with the mapping community there. And I took a course on mapping stories, including my own story associated with forests. So I've also been kind of lightly involved in this, trying to figure out where it's going. And I guess one word I use is cognitive mapping. It's not just mapping the ecosystems and the geology, but mapping concepts onto that. And I will pass it on to Chad.
Hi, I am in Southeast Michigan, so around Ann Arbor, north of Detroit as well. Closest to Lake Huron. Actually, I went to Lake Huron up in the middle of the night. Drove up there last week and caught the dawn. It was really beautiful. It's been quite a while since I've been up there, and first time at that particular place, so it was really glorious. I am interested in mapping in many ways, especially how it relates to story of place. Let's see. Well, we have Victoria and Jonathan. Either of you want to step in?
Sure. Let's see. Okay. Well, so we're located in Rochester, New York, Haudenosaunee territory, and in terms of the mapping, I've been giving some thought to the same kinds of challenges as Peter, which is what is it that we exactly want to map? And then that comes back to the question of what's the purpose of the mapping. One thought that I had was since there are lots of different projects going on, and it ranges all the way from, billions of dollars that the U.S. Congress has put into the Great Lakes Regeneration Initiative or Restoration Initiative, whatever it's called, through to, small projects on the ground, that maybe part of the criteria should be that they're land-based projects in some way. And then we would be looking at regenerative projects in that context. The other part of it is clearly to define where the problems are and where the interventions are needed and where the challenges and opportunities are. And I don't have a real sense of that right now, or indeed of how we exactly would go about identifying all that for the Genesee Finger Lakes.
And yes, what I got from what Jonathan was saying is that a process someone can use to relate to themselves as a bioregion or as a member of the bioregion would be really helpful. And one of those things is mapping, for sure. Mapping the things that are of consequence to the individual, because then they can place themselves in it. Also, they can identify with pieces of land. I really love for there to be a place where farmers whose kids don't want to farm anymore, and so they're going to be selling land, so that they would go to this place and say, if people love my land, I'll let them work my land in regenerative ways, and figure out some governance structure. I want to live here for the rest of my life, and this is what I need, and then this is what's available. And having I just had this kind of dream that that's a real possibility. Why not, among people who have land and who don't really want it developed commercially the way it's going to be developed if they sell it. It's really heartbreaking for people to have to sell their land to developers who are going to put up things that they don't believe in. But to have their land be a demonstration place of all these regenerative things, or just to have it regenerated with volunteer labor and work out the food and get lots of people in the area to learn the skills and then do it on their own property. So I just think that should be possible. I'm not sure how I got into that, but is this the mapping one rather than the Great Lakes? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by it. But like the thought process, I wouldn't know where to start. So it would be great to have this group be able for me to be able to give to my neighbor who wants to relate bioregionally, what were the questions that they would ask? And they get the answers to those questions, and they would be able to situate themselves and presence themselves. What is that thing that we're all talking about living, embodying the bioregion? That's what we ideally want, is for people to embody their bioregion and own it. Like, I own the whole bioregion, and I own the continental, and I own the, what would that mean? What would that look like to own the continent? To be the continent and to be all these other layers and down, and be able to find a piece of land that I can regenerate and love, and have somebody provide the resources to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Good. So we can pass it back to Anna.
Thank you for letting me share that.
Yeah, sure. Well, and I think that those are all really great questions. So I just shared a link to the Google Drive that we've been working in. You can open this if you'd like. It is there's a lot in there. I was going to kind of share what we've been going through for the Niagara River watershed. So if you want to open it up, you can, but I'll also be sharing my screen to kind of share the process with you. And I know that several of you have been on some of the workshop calls that Elliot and I have hosted recently. We had two. We had one that was more based on community art, because that is one of our ideas, is to in order to engage the community more in the process, it would also involve them creatively expressing their views of the watershed, how they relate to the animals and the plants that are within their watershed, and taking that artwork. And similar to Islands of the Salish Sea, which was a community mapping project that engaged about, I believe it's 4,000 community members. They used the community artwork to create this booklet. There were also a lot of paid artists, but what we were thinking was we could use community artwork to decorate the cover of our booklet of maps that we're creating. And our focus is on the Niagara River watershed. The only reason why we're focusing on the Niagara River watershed is when looking at the Great Lakes Basin, we essentially asked ourselves, let's kind of break it down into a more manageable size, more of a single bioregion, if you will. If anything, the Niagara River watershed might even be, I would say, would even be smaller than a bioregion. And let's look at what could be most important, what can be used by community members within this area. So when we're talking about what is, how do we decide what to map? I think that the biggest thing that we found was we went to community groups. We went to the Buffalo Niagara Waterkeepers, which is a community outreach group that would be able to use these maps in order to engage community members. So getting much farther of a reach than either Elliot or I or anybody on this call likely could in one location. I do a lot of educational outreach with them, where we talk to schools, we table at most events within the Buffalo and Niagara Falls area. We speak to children's groups, to other community groups. So I think that that's one thing that was really a benefit when using this, is we're able to develop something that's meaningful for an organization that's already doing a lot of outreach and that has specific needs. And I just wanted to share some of the things that we've been working on here too. So the theme that we came up with was, just losing where I can share my screen. The theme that we came up with was swimming as a river, because one of the biggest concerns within the Niagara River watershed is pollution. There's a lot of phosphorus overloading that leads to harmful algal blooms, which is a very big focus of the Buffalo Niagara Waterkeepers, where they are doing a lot of restoration work, not only volunteer and educational outreach, but also they're contracting fairly large restoration projects throughout the area, and developing what they call living shorelines. So shorelines can either be soft or hard. Hard is concrete, hard is rocks. That's all you see around most of the Buffalo and Niagara Falls metropolitan area, are these hard shorelines that just that don't filter any of the water that goes into the river. So it ends up turning into a lot of our waste that goes into the river, and leading to a lot of the pollution and harmful algal blooms that make it toxic to humans and to wildlife. So some of the things that we when we met with them, we asked them, like, what are the maps that you think that you would find most useful? And so we do have some of those listed here. I'd love to get feedback on everyone. If there's any other ones that you think might be meaningful for us to include. So some of the areas, this is a call to action Word doc that Elliot put together, but the main thing that I want to focus on in here is where we have our table of contents. So the book that we want to create is something that is printed maps with a nice cover, that any volunteer can bring to an event, open up, easy enough for them to access. The Buffalo Niagara Waterkeepers have quite a few of these, but they don't have anything that is comprehensive of the entire Niagara River. So both the Canadian shore and the American shoreline, and they don't have anything that really they have stuff that's already in magazines. So you have to flip open through a magazine that's already full of tons of information, where we want to have something that's very easily understandable to anybody, that you could open it up and you could read a story as you go through the maps, rather than trying to sift through lots of scientific information too. So some of the areas that we were looking through are the different wetlands of the watershed. There's a lot of protected wetlands in Western New York and in the Niagara Peninsula, which is the Canadian region along the Niagara River. The hard shorelines versus soft shorelines. Different Niagara River Greenway projects. That's the that's New York State area along the Niagara River, is we call it the Greenway. We also have a map of community gardens. Buffalo has a very large community network of community gardens, and they've also extended into Niagara Falls. So they focus on purchasing abandoned lots that they then reclaim for community use to grow food, to grow native perennial plants, and it's all very community driven as well. The community members are the ones that that propose the garden. It's free to access. The Grassroots Community Garden Networks provides all the soil. They provide a lot of plants. They provide the tools for people to use. I'm a member of it. It's quite nice. Combined sewer overflows is another one. So that's when the sewer system, after a particularly hard rain, when there's a lot of runoff, it overflows, dumping a lot of the pollution into the water, just the way that sewer systems were set up back in the turn of the 20th century. It was not built to handle the amount of water that comes through, and that is because of the amount of hard surfaces that are now due to buildings and roads and concrete surfaces. It's not being soaked into the ground. We also have harmful algal blooms that are popping up. We have maps of that. We have maps of the water sampling sites that the Buffalo Niagara Waterkeepers have, as well as there's national data on what beaches have high levels of E. coli during dry and wet seasons throughout the summer. So what is actually a beach that is swimmable versus not safe for swimming. We have a list of different toxins, lists of native amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals, and then also some information on the different indigenous tribes that are have historically or currently have settlements in this area. So that's kind of what we are starting to collect. I know Elliot was also working on a phosphorus overloading as a heat map, so we can actually see where those areas where there's a lot of phosphorus dumping into our waterways, that would also be included in these list of maps. So I'm interested to hear if this is kind of, I suppose, giving you guys ideas for what might be most important in your area, as well as just feedback on some of the information that we're collecting. I think that in my experience, being part of this group, being part of a number of other conservation or environmental groups in the Buffalo area, water quality is like one of the top areas of concern, focus, and of interest to a lot of people, because water is just everywhere that we look. We have so much water, and talking to people about water that is safe to get into, safe to swim in, safe to fish in, that's plastic free, that really seems to be very meaningful to people. So I've been thinking a lot about this in terms of developing some sort of story of place, very similar to what Benji's doing out in the Colorado River. What is meaningful to communities and what drives them to action. And that seems to be very resonant with a lot of people.
I kept thinking of things and then you got to them. I guess I have one question to build on what you just said about Benji's work. Kind of what's the format? Are you for example, I'm imagining as you go along little vignettes or little boxes, carve outs with little stories. I mean, do you plan to incorporate those kinds of people and places stories as you go along?
Do you mean in the packet of maps or in like the story of place that we're developing?
So I guess I lost that thread. I'm sorry. So you've got a package of maps with some of these things mapped on it, and then you've got a separate document, which is in fact what I just asked about, stories in place.
Yeah, so we don't have like a document or anything of it, but I'll give a little bit of background. So the story of place, it's really more of just a development of an idea of what is most meaningful to the people that live in a certain place. You talk about what they love, what upsets them about some of the degradation challenges, what moves them to engage. And it tends to change for the audience. It changes for the place that you're, so it'd be different. It might be slightly different in Buffalo than it is in Cleveland, but it's more so just like a storyline or a thread that we want to be bringing with us and developing over time as we're starting to become more people of place. So I don't have a document of it yet. I certainly have some ideas that I've jotted down. I don't have anything that's ready to share, but I suppose when I talk about it, I'm thinking more along the general theme of what I like to bring to my conversations whenever I'm talking about some of the work that we're doing and how it can be relevant to people who might be interested in joining.
That was helpful. Sorry, I lost that. I guess I was thinking of it. I was thinking of the map and how the stories map onto the map.
Mhm.
No, that sounds great.
Yeah, and I see these maps as a tool to certainly help with that story of place. But that's an area that I'm very interested in exploring a little bit more, is getting an idea of what drives people. And I think that's something that I would like to continue to explore in like our campfires. I do have some questions that can help prompt some of those things too, if people find that helpful to discuss.
Yes, I'd love those questions.
Okay. They are, well, you might also have them, Victoria. They're part of the Regenesis Institute, the story of place.
Yeah, I recognize it, and I don't remember a lot, but when I hear it, I'll remember it, and it's really helpful to hear it in this context.
Mhm. I can go grab them real quick. I think I have the book in my room. I
Well,
can.
I assume other people are interested
Mhm.
as well. The questions that go into writing the story of place or telling the story of place, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I can go grab those. While Kim, do you want to check in?
Sure. Yeah, sorry I'm late. I have a little link from a really excellent magazine article that I wanted to check in with, so I put it in there. When Niagara Falls ran dry. So there's that. And something
Share that with me.
Yep.
Oh, sorry, Jonathan, can you mute us?
with Niagara Falls, and I was just surprised because in this power over and power with, I thought that was really interesting. But it's a cool little thing. I've been saving it to share this Monday. And I think that's it. Everything's good. Just had to work a little later today. Good to see you.
Good to
And
see-
Peter again.
Good to see you too, Kim. And thank you for sharing. We were just starting to talk about Story of Place, which is Benji has been doing a lot of work on that in the Colorado River Basin, bringing together a lot of different landscape leaders and trying to have a coherent story across the entire Colorado River Basin, which is not exactly what Regenesis Institute focuses on. They're the ones that kind of coined the term Story of Place, even though this is obviously a very long time practice that anybody who feels very connected to their place might be able to have some understanding of. But in the Colorado River Basin, what they have found that is really motivating for a lot of people is this idea of regenerating the headwaters, which flow all the way down to the delta, and how that can impact everybody along the Colorado River Basin. But the questions that I wanted to share, there's three that I think that are really great to start out with. It's and you can focus on all three, you can focus on one at a time, but it's, how do local people describe their place? How do local people express place? And what do local people love about their place? And I'll type those in here. And so for each of it, how do local people describe place? That tends to be more topographical. You might be focusing on like for me, I live in Buffalo, New York. I live along the on the shore of Lake Erie. There's the Peace Bridge not too far from me that gets you right into Canada. Up north, there's the Niagara River that leads into the Lake Ontario with Niagara Falls. So it's very focused on the topography. How do local people express place focuses more on how do they celebrate their place? What are some of the festivals or the parades or the fairs that people have? What is their focus on the music, the community gatherings that they have there? Is there a running theme that is really important to the people there? And then what do local people love about their place? That's really just what is their pride? When people talk about their place and they're describing it, what do they get very excited about telling people, or what do they show out of town guests coming in? So these are just some things to think about when you're starting to develop what does it mean to be a person of your place, and how can you find the potential that will be really motivating to the people in your place in terms of regenerative work. What could be a really big catalyst in terms of getting people motivated to engage? Brad?
So, yeah, I guess my reaction is I'm always trying to think of things in the simplest terms, like, so how, and just being here for a year and a half, how do I explain to my kids what it's like to be here, and just to integrate, how important water is. And here is really simple because, water comes out between a gorge and then opens up into these series of canals, which is what we live on. And then it, flows back into the river and goes downstream. So even like small children can understand that. But I still have not, I don't have a, what do you say? Like the elevator pitch or whatever. I don't have like a really simple narrative of what the river is and what it means here. So I guess for me, like that's always, how do you explain things in the fewest amount of simple words that can create a unity around the water that we're around. So I guess I don't even have a good handle of like what the Great Lakes are, how they work, and like that also is, I don't have any academic experience. Like I took some geology at the Southwest, so I understand a little bit of the geology here, but I don't understand what's going on there. And so if I were to come to you, or if my kids were to be introduced to you, what would you say about the water in your area?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is great practice. Thanks, Brad. Would anybody want to try describing? I mean, I could do that for mine too, but I just want to open it up to see if anybody else from the Great Lakes would like to try to describe to Brad some of the things that are really important in your area.
I would say that, because we have 20% of the world's fresh water, and because the lakes are all interconnected, that it's important to understand how they function as a whole and what things are sustaining them, what things are contaminating them, there's been a lot of improvement in the pollution, but it certainly has not all been handled. And there are, as Anna mentioned, combined sewer overflows and other kinds of problematic areas related to the quality of the water. But it's it's an enormous route for travel, and has been since the time of the indigenous populations, and it flows from one lake to the next, so that whatever happens in Lake Superior ends up in Lake Ontario. That was very cool, that little graphic or photograph of what happens when Niagara Falls runs dry. That's kind of cute. And here in Rochester, we're sitting on the Genesee River and the Finger Lakes, which all feed into Lake Ontario as part of this larger watershed. And certainly the Genesee is not safe to swim or drink or, catch fish in. So people need to understand that what we have done, inadvertently or otherwise, is completely contaminate the water around us. And so we're constantly having to purify it and process it and treat it to make it usable. And then we use it for all kinds of things, including flushing our toilets, and just continue to pay to have it cleaned up, and then we make it dirty again. So, and we don't take advantage of the opportunities for natural wastewater treatment in the ecosystem. It's one of the things that's really been a big issue for me, are these wetlands treatment systems that are a vast improvement over sewage treatment plants. So that's what I would say about the water system right here. It's one of the things. Yeah, go ahead.
So again, not being from that area, not being familiar with it, how'd the water get there?
Well, these are historic depressions related to the glaciers moving forward and backwards over many, centuries. And so they're characteristic patterns in which the land has been grooved, and there's actually when they talk about the Great Lakes Basin, there is actually a basin of rock underneath the central part of the Great Lakes, which is, I still don't understand all the geology of it. Maybe other people can explain it better. But I know under Lake Huron, there's a salt mine, which is, quite famous and produces, I don't know, some significant portion of the salt in America. That's what I know so far.
Hmm.
Anyone else know more about the geology?
I'm remembering a exercise in fourth grade where we drew the US and we drew this line along of where the last glaciation was. So that sticks out from 40 years ago, like doing that exercise. And as you're talking now, I'm just wondering, was it like the ice like over different ice ages? Was the ice forming and coming back? So like a scraping almost?
Yes, yes. And and the huge pressure and the weight of the ice on the land. As I recall, in the last ice age, the edge goes down to New Jersey in the Atlantic Highlands. Is the kind of end of the moraine from the glaciers. But this area was really pounded by a lot of very heavy glaciation, and which created almost an inland sea, or a series of basins that just traverse the landscape.
Yeah, I'm kind of getting it more. Like honestly, so the Midwest, I mean my uncle's farm in Minnesota, and I know in earlier times that was all like swampland that was drained off and stuff. But mostly the East Coast and the mid and your area is kind of a blank on the map. I'm not that interested in. So you have to, and again, like I'm thinking like a 6-7-year-old, like what's the hook? Like how do you talk about, how do you tell the stories of those lakes without saying 20,000 years ago and this many gallons and stuff, where it's an engaging story, and then it's something that's going to stick with them, and then you hang the rest of it on that, right?
Excuse me, Peter, would you like to share something because you're leaving at 4:45?
So, interesting question, Brad, which I'm prompted to give a short answer. One thing I will say, as I believe Isle Royal in Lake Superior is actually the edge of a volcano too. So volcanoes played a role in this. But the question is, what sticks in a kid's mind? I mean, I think what's stuck in the mind about our region is the Burning River, the Esmond Fitzgerald, fishing, the fact that Lake Erie is the shallowest, warmest, and most productive lake. So I mean, those are some of the stories that you might tell around the fisherman, or a canoe, a boater, or a canoeist. But that actually differentiates Lake Erie from some of the other lakes. I'll say one other thing that I learned recently. We needed Lake Erie because there were so many swamps around the north shore of Lake Erie that you literally could not go from Cleveland to Toledo without going into the lake, because there were so many swamps. So, and I'll say that was supposed to be the last thing. So this idea that the lake provided transportation in many ways, and I do think, I think it was mentioned, Anna mentioned birds. We have a lot of, we're parts of flyways, and I think that catches kids' imaginations, imagining the swans traveling all the distances they do, for example. So I see Chad's got his hand up. Chad, I apologize. I do have to go. But
I missed that last part, but I wish I caught it because he was on something interesting. Um, yeah. Just a couple of thoughts riffing off that. Geologically speaking, the glaciers are also made of water. So it's interesting thought that one form of water scoured out the land to make space for another kind of water. Which then gets into the story of climate and geology, how they interplay with each other over large periods of time. And then also the land. So the basins have so much water because they're draining off such a huge amount of land. And that land is also generally it's pretty flat around here. So that means it extends far and all that water makes its way to the basins. So that there's a part of the story that I don't hear very much is the connection between the land and rivers and ponds with the Great Lakes. Usually the story seems like, okay, they're over here discrete in a way or not integrally necessarily like connected to the other ecology and geology, but they are. So, I mean, you hear about pollution problems, runoff as being, a source of pollution for the lakes. There's a land water connection, but I'm sure there are others and others that are more speak to the ecology, healthy ecology of that relationship. And yeah, and not that those are common stories, but these are just thoughts of stories that I'm learning to, use to understand the area. And then another thing is my sense is, which we haven't really spoken about, is that there are many different stories. So there are many different communities, and those communities and industries relate to the waters in different ways. And some of that is through from like recreation, fishing, boating. Boating is huge around here. Swimming, drinking water, all of it. And that those, nevertheless, there's also a general sense, at least in Michigan, I imagine it's elsewhere, of having a pride, like even if people aren't well acquainted with the lakes or maybe they've never seen them, I think people around here identify them as something important, and maybe it's something they learn in grade school or along the way. But I think there's a general sense of pride without being very specific on the history or particular uses or problems for a lot of people. And then of course there are people who are more connected through, like I was saying before, recreation or well-being, livelihood and so forth. Jonathan, Victoria.
I was creating in my mind a teacher or an elder talking to a child about the stories of various place at various levels, scales. And I can imagine somebody saying, why should I care what happens on Lake Michigan, or, we're on Lake Ontario, where does, what after that, like wanting to expand. But when we grew up, there was no such idea that I would be interested in the land in Massachusetts, right next to me. The only thing that's important is this political boundary, but not the land itself. But what I was thinking is, I'm kind of losing the thread about the future. What we want to be able to have children have a grasp of is what the Indigenous probably had their children understand, which is there are places that we relate to on various scales, and it's important for you to understand the scale of certain concerns that really do concern you, like what goes on in the Great Lakes really does should concern you. You ought to be interested in what goes on in the Great Lakes, not just your own lakefront. And that will be more the whole sense of it, that there's everything's got a whole, and the Great Lakes have a whole. Nothing like that was ever, and then people around the world could relate to us as the Great Lakes. They would have studied the Great Lakes, and we would have studied the geography and the places of Africa beyond the political borders, but just what Africa is made of, and how could you describe Africa? I have little pieces, but everything's in little categories of country, as opposed to us being really connected to generating the earth, and we care about the earth, and we do not care about the political boundaries, and everything is local. So I'm just thinking how education will of necessity be like what we're talking about. And we should be giving this to children who we want to be aware of being grounded in this level of reality versus everything in the political state, municipality. Relating to that is not relating to reality. I mean, it's just different, but don't get confused. So it just kind of boggles my mind what we're doing, and the possibilities for languaging our way to a critical mass. And I think if we could be catalysts of that languaging for the movement, being able to have all the things that we all want, and there's a million organizations supporting this, all see the one story of speaking from a global point of view, owning it right from the start, and being curious about everything, not just where I came from. Like, I have no idea what most continents look like, really. And if you own the earth, if you really own it as being a human being, and we're all related, wouldn't I care about people on the other edge of, on the opposite side of the earth? As a member of that, when we get people to really understand that we really are connected, what happens in one place, is going to impact the other. And I think maybe that is the paradigm shift, that if that were to happen, a lot of other things would fall into place about why we would, and then we'd want to have governance that is, looking at things from a global point of view, and all of the way down to how does that work in regenerating the land itself, but telling that story of a future world where that would make sense, wouldn't it? And have them live from that. So, and they'll learn the other. So that's just, it's exciting.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, for me, water is the key, right? It's the thing that you can explain to a kid. It's the thing you can explain to an adult. It's when you go to a place, then you would ask, where does your water come from, right? Like, how does your water cycle work where you are? I mean, it's very simple for me to show my kids, right? Because I can just point to our friend, we can go up to Tim Casey's farm, we can go up to the Grand Mesa, the largest flat top mountain here, and know that there's reservoirs, and that's where our domestic water comes from, right? And then the mapping exercise I did with you, Anna, where I just draw like these two lines of, like the Grand and the Gunnison rivers coming together here. So it's easy to see because there's topography, right? Like it's like you can just point and say that's where the water comes from. I'm driving with my kids the other day, and they're like, where's the river come from? And I'm like, great question. Let's just keep driving up here. There's less and less water. All of a sudden it's, comes through this drainage. So it's like a really simple story where I think like at the Great Lakes there, it's a little bit more like, because you don't have that topography, because you're flat, because you can't see, like there's just water there, there's water there, there's water. So how are we related to it, right? And I really I love, like, yeah, that idea of, like, you know, like a big grater, like pushing back, like the water pushing back in its frozen form, pushing back and forth across the land to scour this out. And then of course we all know lake effect snow in Buffalo, right? Like, so maybe even though you're you know, like, why not do like a map of the water cycle where you are, right? So the water all runs down there, but then because there's so much water, it's influencing your weather, right? It's driving the clouds, it's driving a certain climate. Like, how do you three-dimensionally map that? Yeah, just it's kind of a fun conversation. So I hope that's helpful for you guys to have a foreigner to your lands. Chad, I think you were up next. Or in my screen you were.
Thanks. Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up rivers, and rivers I see as having, well, this is not really right, but having edges. Although really rivers are mobile and the banks are moving back and forth, so it's dynamic. But what I mean by that is boundaries are places between two kinds of environments, like water and land, right? There's a boundary there. And it's the boundaries by which, like, we experience the Great Lakes, a river certainly, but also the lakes in an embodied way. So part of the story is the grandness of the lakes and the sheer quantity of water and the history there. Those are abstractions. I mean, people who maybe, you know, traverse the lakes by ship or sometimes flying over there, you get a sense of what they are, the size. Maps do that through figures, but in terms of like experience and connecting to people in their lives, it's through the shoreline, or maybe they're on a boat not very far offshore. So maybe just like put a pin in that, to think about what it means to create stories that just really connect with people in ways that are direct to that scale, but then also can be sort of languaged in a way to express out into the larger scale. Maybe that's a way to find that hook we're looking for before.
Thanks. And that reminds me of a really great quote. I will find it and put it in here about a shoreline and people and anything that's at the shoreline. That's where the life is and new things are coming up. So that could be a great part of a story because we've got so many shorelines here, and not just for the lakes. But I don't know. So I feel like in the story, I want to be like living a new story and one, or picking up on the good that's here, like the love of the Great Lakes. There's so much love and pride for the Great Lakes. And I've been really liking looking at maps that show the mountain ranges that are coming down through Ohio, because I don't, you know, just in my mind, I don't consider Ohio a mountain state because that's not where I live, but it is. And you can see then, okay, well, this is where the Ohio River flows. So this is where it's part of the Mississippi Basin, right? And you can, and then knowing what's happening, like, and here's where the oil and petroleum companies are all wanting, you know, to build the microplastic plants, you know, right here. So that's something to keep in mind. And the rivers, I think the rivers tell amazing stories. And I just happened to go through the Great Lakes on this little whirlwind trip that was actually very spacious. And I didn't see that many human beings, but the ones I saw and met up with, they were all living in right relationship with land. and had stories about rivers. So much so that there's like communication and, one friend, there's a strategic plan for a town that insights like from the river are going to be in there. So a story that has to do with relationships, and I think the fact that we are the largest freshwater basin on the planet would be exciting to children anywhere and should be exciting to us. And we want to protect and take care of this water and know that it flows to the oceans, and we all play a role in not polluting the oceans and not warming the oceans. So I just think there's a lot we can do story-wise. And just that balance between how beautiful it is, like, and the people I met with, they make the time for ceremony, make the time to go and just be in these natural places. And I guess the last thing is, like, there's so much activity here in Cleveland, so much people doing so many different things. I have no idea what they all are, but loosening that up to kind of spread that around. Well, what would that look like? And I think we have to get people are already excited, have a place for people who are excited to do things, and also have actions for the very real concerns we have also. But it's a beautiful place, beautiful.
So some of the things that Kim was talking about, I just shared in the chat something that I think really depicts a lot of what you guys were saying about, like, the shorelines being how much that's where really the water quality is degraded. It starts at the shorelines. The fact that there are such hard boundaries between the water and the shorelines is causes a big problem. But there are so this is like the Living Shorelines project, where they show how they are adding in habitats and adding in what are they called, bow swales, so making it more of a soft shoreline that limits that hard boundary in between where the water begins and where the water ends and where the land begins. And I think that that's one thing that I'm going to be exploring a little bit. I met with someone from the Sierra Club. She's very well connected in the Buffalo community in a lot of different environmental groups. And she's inviting me to speak to the Erie Niagara chapter of the Sierra Club. We have a fairly decent sized group out here just about bioregionalism. But one of the things that I was talking to her about was I was trying out this story of place, like how can we engage people in a way so that they start seeing taking care of our lakes and taking care of our land as that if we take care of that, they'll take care of us. And I think a lot of it comes down to the connection with the water, so people feel that they can recreate in the water safely, that their recreation is also safe for the water. So kayaking, canoeing, swimming, those kinds of things, less about the boating. But also just that they're like the communities that develop around the lake are really critical too. So even you can get people who don't normally think of themselves as environmentalists to really care a lot about the water and their land when you put it in terms of what's meaningful for them. Some of the most conservative people I know are probably some of the biggest environmentalists because they spend so much time out on the land, whether it's hunting and fishing or what have you. So making it relevant for them, you can bring in a lot of different people. So it's not just these environmental organizations that have people who studied environmental studies that are engaging in these projects. But I'm even thinking like things like if we start talking about the amount of the not focusing so much on the fact that lakes provide us with resources, but with the fishing community, the fish in Lake Erie and the Niagara River, I'm sure it's similar in Lake Ontario, and I think it's probably better in some of the other lakes, but there's guides on how much fish you can eat. And really for most fish, you can only eat about 8 ounces of fish maximum once per week, or 4 ounces once per week or once every other week. So there's a limit to how much fish you can consume before it's considered unsafe because of the pollutants that are in our water. And so when people hear that, they think, I'm just not going to eat any of the fish. That doesn't sound safe or healthy at all. But if we were to focus on having our waterways be more clean, you'd be able to bring in things like restaurants into the conservation project. How are they supporting the waterways? So I think, like just focusing more on the sense of community and what's meaningful to people and bringing them into the story is really important. But that's kind of what I'm trying to play around with when I'm speaking to, like, what is bioregionalism and how can we start messaging out what our story of place is to people and communities. I also did want to just acknowledge that this meeting was only scheduled until 5. So if you have to jump off, don't be afraid to jump off, but we can continue the conversation too. Brad?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna get so excited. I'm gonna forget to pick up my kids from school. That's a little bit far for them to walk back. I was just, as you were, so earlier in the conversation, there's some of the stuff you were leading with the pollution element, like, oh, we gotta take, like, oh, look, there's this pollution problem we gotta get around. And for me, just in my mind and the way things work, then, if I'm able to see, okay, your water, you have a lot of water, but it's there, right? And so with the water cycle, every time that it evaporates, turns into a cloud and comes down, you're still concentrating all the waste there, right? So then, like, that could be something that kids could understand, right? There's a lot of water, but there's a lot of people, and the more we soil it, the more we soil, ourselves, right? Like that's where we're trying to get, right? Is that the water is more important because we are the water. Like the water gives us life. Like what kind of crazy system would incentivize soiling and not valuing the water? And I think I could, I think so. Like with that framework, if I came there, I could explain to my kids why the water is so important and what's happening on a level they could get. Thanks.
Oh, I wanted to know if it would be appropriate to ask the design school to come up with a story of place that would be generic up to maybe a continental level. So we don't all have to create that part of the story. And because I would assume that Joe knows about this from the Big Bang, like when you're talking to kids, it'll ultimately gets back to, something like there's a Big Bang because there's nothing else that we know. And that's how it all started. Like the question, when did it start? So I would love to have a common story about that. This is the design school story, and the story is going to change and evolve, but this is the one up to the continental level. And the continents have to do their own thing, or here's the ones for the continents, and then do your bioregional thing within the continents and have the story continue. So that we have that whole progression and people can really own the human race of us, you know. We all started out not even knowing other people existed, but every time well, I don't know how we became such a warring society. But
Well,
we
we
are
were-
all connected. We're all connected, yes.
Yeah, we were connected to the land and then we became disconnected and we allowed all these things to happen. And now the work is to reconnect to a land that's probably going to throw us off. But that's okay, because if the land's more important than us, then our suffering is not so much.
I just want to say that's not the story that I hear out of Indigenous friends. It's not the story. And in fact, you know, my friend Mulaney will say, we never say there's the last bird because we know there's another bird in the spirit world. And I'm telling you, there's not the stress that we have, that we live in.
Could you say,
Hmm?
could you say what the Indigenous believe?
Just she said, you know, we will never say, you'll never hear someone say, oh, the last bird is gone, because they know there's another bird in the spirit world. It's just, it's a different mindset, and there's peace when we live in right relationship with the land and all the other, you know, syntony spheres, with ancestors, cosmos, other species, our own species, our own voice. I mean, it's relationship. And then it allows us to do the work, I think, in a good way.
What work? Like, what work? How would you say the work?
This work, any work, or regenerative work, transformative work. You know, and the one thing also was just a lesson, like it's not like people said this is the lesson, but it was inherent in all these situations, was making the time, you know, for a ceremony. We stopped at another friend's home and was part of a ceremony because she's making a sweat lodge. And you just take the time, you know, the day before and do things. And we tend to, I'm speaking for myself, forget about that when I'm caught up in work and all these other things, or start worrying about this or that. It's like, take a breath. Think of the air. I mean, air is life. Water is life. A lot of people think water is alive. We're 70% water. So there's some comfort in that to me. Like when you said, Brad, we are water. It's like, yeah, we really are. And there's peace in that. And it's a nice way to raise kids. I wish I had 20 years back. They'd be less stressed out now.
But Victoria, I guess to speak to what the work is, like so much of the work for me is just unlearning, right? Like just like not being angry about what we've done, but just understanding this Watiko culture, like this individualism, endless growth is good. You know, to a point of very, very narcissistic, the ideals that I'm in this culture saturating my children with day by day are dying, right? Like, so I think that's and the thing that I hold in my head, and I didn't say it, but the stories we need to live by don't exist yet, right? And of course, when we go to the indigenous people, they had but we can't go back there, right? We're here now. Like we've done all this. And you know, what stories are we gonna carry forward with tomorrow? Like what stories am I gonna tell my children that aren't gonna lead them to think that their culture, that they're the problem, right?
Well, how are you living now, Brad? You're living a very nice life, right? I mean, that's it. And it's not indigenous people or not from the past. It's now, it's always been here. Always been here. Just not the, you know, the dominant story. We can help make that more of a dominant story. It sure would be nice for us all to live in relationship like that, but I feel like we can. This next paradigm, there's no reason why not to embody it now. You know, and you're in Colorado, right? Beautiful part of the world. It's
Yes.
so beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
I would focus on the good.
oh no, I'm in like the best place that I've been in my life. And I'm, you know, but before I go pick up my kids, I'm just gonna go check on my dad, who, you know, I'm taking care of my 81-year-old father with dementia. And like focusing on death every day, that's it's just an amazing way to live. Because you know, the sun came up another day and I'm here and I have this brain to appreciate and see. No, I feel really, really good. But again, I just don't have, or I'm working to develop those stories, right? I'm working with my children to develop those stories. And that to me is what's so important about the design school and what all we're doing. It's not about where this might go or not, you know, because everything's gonna collapse at a point. But the stories might last.
Well, and some things do need to go away. Like, you know, some things it will be good for some things to go away, like the exploitive thing. So, you know, words are powerful.
I don't know what time it is, but
Yeah.
yes, Jenkinson has been incredible. Oh my gosh. Wow.
Who?
Oh, Stephen Jenkinson. Anna was just like, hey, you should listen to Stephen Jenkinson. And I'm just like, I can't listen to enough of that guy. He's just like you haven't come across him, Victoria?
Jonathan,
Yeah,
have you come across?
no, I've never heard of it.
Oh my gosh.
Heard of him?
You guys are in for such a treat. He's just like, his use of language is incredible. My gosh. And yeah, I mean, somebody who really speaks the truth.
Yeah, is it this? I'm looking for your link.
Oh,
So
I haven't put a link in it. He speaks a lot too. So he worked in
Can somebody put a link. I know I can
Yeah,
capture
let me find a good, right before we get off, I'll try to find a good I just listened to this incredible talk by him. I mean, they're all good.
yeah, he was a I don't know if it was technically hospice, but he essentially worked in hospice care, and he helped to care for people as they died. And one of the things that he speaks a lot to is that we have a death phobic culture, that we
Yeah.
like to pretend that we will continue living on, and it's a surprise to us when it turns out that we die. And he thinks that he relates it a lot to how we treat the earth as well, that we just don't have this this sense that there is a finality to things. So some of the things that Brad was saying before, where like when you're surrounded by death, it can be they're very depressing. Or you can look at it as like being very aware of your own death and treating each day as important, and making sure that you're living each day as though you're going to die. How that just shifts everything so much. And it's the same thing with how we treat the earth.
For those to come,
Mhm.
7
Wow.
generations.
Yeah, and that it's
Wow,
actually
wow,
incredibly
wow.
important that people
Yeah.
do die and that things do die because it gives life to new things, and how it's not something to avoid. It's something to lean into um and appreciate in a way. So it's
Right. And it's not just when you're old, I'm getting, it's like to have that relationship because any of us could be in an accident, you know,
yeah.
and die. So it can be, death can take us by surprise when it's not supposed to happen
Mhm.
or it's not typically happening. Um, so is that part of the culture also, Brad? That it's something that people do for life and they have a relationship with death such that they're living their life like, you know, they don't know how many days they have, but are they in right relationship with the land? Are they in right relationship with the people they love all the time? And, you know, that's called integrity anyway. It's a wonderful way to live. And, yeah, so,
For me, for me, one of the things that I've been writing and keeping with me is life takes, death gives, right? And it's that composting, that recomposting, right? And personally, I'm coming out of about like an 8-10 year cycle of depression, which like the last few years have been just like basically since I've had my kids, I've been overwhelmed and depressed. 2 years ago, I got on meds that were really helpful. And last week, like I've totally titrated off of them. And I have like, I'm starting to like finally have like a full range of emotions. Like I listen to a music video, I read something, I cry, and I just go out and like live life. And it's just freaking amazing. But
oh,
that,
I've never heard of that. That is such a great idea.
I mean,
Because we've been living on, you know, um, you know, depression stuff. And we just think everybody does, or lots of people do, but you're right, is that you can't feel the highs and lows, I guess. I didn't never thought of it that, yeah, if I'm doing everything else naturally, why would I want to stick on that? And, you know, you get the sense you're going to die or something, but no, it might actually be a wonderful experience to really experience life in a way I haven't. Thank you, Brad.
well, and I was asking myself in those depths of like overwhelm and depression, I'm like, well, certainly there must be a reason for this. Like I can't figure it out now, but neither can the plants in the fall when they die and they go to the ground and they lay fallow and they decompose. Like that's where the magic happens.
Well, and one more thing is you might want to look into the co-regulating with plants. My dialoguing partner, she's, you know, when our nervous systems, you know, go certain ways, there's way, you know, we can attune and connect with. She'll go to a grandfather tree in the middle of Paris. I mean, and calm down. But you know, there are ways to do this, right? And there's all people like talking about the, oh, I shouldn't even be speaking because I don't know that much about it, but you can co-regulate, especially in those very high or very low moments. Because we're in relationship with plants and trees at all times, whether we are aware of it or not. And you know, maybe you can connect with ancestors, right?
Mm.
This is a very big miraculous place we're in.
Mm.
Wow.
Yeah, and back to Anna, back to the mapping and stuff. Like I saw some of the thing, but I would also like maybe that's something for the mapping also is like where are the plants? Like where are like still the healthy communities of plants? I was just in the mountains yesterday in a little mountain town and they had a map and it was like this is the old growth forest. Like you just go over here and up there and you go sit in the big trees. It's right there. That was on the map. And I looked at that map for a while with the boys because we were right by the river. And then we left. And then my 3-year-old was just like, let's go back to the map and tell me the story, you know? Like, because it was just like looking at that key on the map and we're here and then we can go here and the mountains here. And I mean, it speaks to us, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, and you can sit with your back against a tree. That's what I heard. Men, it's good for men to sit with their backs against trees. Does something energetically, and women lay down on the ground. But I think it's want to sit with my back against a tree, or a guy wants to lay down on the ground, that's okay.
Do
Mm.
they lay down on their back?
I think so. I think so.
Mm.
But yeah, you get, you are definitely connecting with Earth then. You are you're laying down on the ground.
And it may be that you are face first.
You could
Mm.
roll down a hill.
Here.
Yeah, so I'm gonna run too. Thank you
Okay.
all so much. And
Yeah.
yeah, Victoria, if you want to talk,
Okay.
I'm bursting with words. I just usually
Oh.
bite my tongue.
All right. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thanks
Bye,
for
everybody.
joining, Brad.
Thank you, Anna.
Bye. Bye, everyone. See you
Um,
later.
So I do just want to mention next week there is no meeting. It's that one weird meeting a month that we skip. But yeah, thank you
Anna
guys.
gets a break.
Yes, you deserve a rest. Anna.
Yes.
You're so prolific. You're amazing. I'm just really enjoying everything that you set up and facilitate is magical.
Oh, thank you,
I
Victoria.
agree.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
You leave so much space, but you somehow create a direction that really works and deepens things. Slows things down enough where people could actually think new thoughts. I mean, it's really hard. You could take in information, but you can't think when people are talking.
Mhm.
It's hard to think your own thoughts, but that's what people ought to be doing, is listening and then thinking their own thoughts about what was said, because there's so much wisdom in these groups. Like I can't take notes fast enough to capture what I should be looking at and why and who. And so for me, everything's new, and I'm trying to, and I know there are resources and all that, but there's so much to take advantage of. This is a beautiful place. Thank you, Anna.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm getting so many ideas for the design school here on the land. We have 73 acres that we are partnering with somebody who says, hey, go for it.
So exciting.
Mhm.
And he's got some, he can do the recreation stuff, and they've got the recreation infrastructure, but they don't have anything regenerative. And they've got forests and pond and streams and agricultural land, and so it's a playground. And the two permaculture designers and green people here both flipped. Like, I got to be involved in this. So we need to find money for some of them, because this is their livelihood. Can't just expect them to volunteer. And we would really, really want their input, because they would give a lot of time. If they could have a certain basic, way of being compensated that's fair. That's what we have to raise the local money for, right?
Mhm. Well, good luck. If there's anything that I can do to help, I'm happy that I can hear about how everything's going, but I would love to get out there someday.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Well, thanks again.
Yeah.
All right.
Bye,
Bye.
ladies.
Guys, have a nice Monday. Bye.
Bye.